Two, 1, 2. There we go. Good. Should we get this show on the road? Woo! Wow, what a crowd. Is it good to be live again in the world? I mean, good Lord. Whoa, this is great. This is great. First off, I want to thank everybody for coming, but I also want to thank the great Artichoke community. This is a Portland institution and has been for almost 50 years. So to them. And some of you may not know, this is a volunteer-run operation. And we have at the bar, Shelley, and at the mic, Gary, at the sound, Gary, and Steve was at the door. And they want all to know this is their 50th anniversary year. So, well done. And I understand there's a big do planned in June. And they said if anybody knows anybody with deep pockets to let them know at the bar. And I said most of my friends are those people. So, you know. So, well, thank you all for coming out tonight. Tonight's show is called Love Stories from the Rag and the Bone Shop of the Heart. And it's stories, poems, and tales and songs of life's tattered, worn fabric and life's incredible artful weavings, reweavings, remodels, renovations, outright demolitions, and reconstructions. Anybody ever been through one of those? Yeah, good. And speaking of reweaving, there was a woman who really knew reweaving well. In fact, her name was Weaver Woman. And the White Mountain Apache people, this is their tale, they say she lived way in the mountains, the White Mountains in Arizona. And she was an ancient woman. She was as old as time itself. But the amazing thing about her was as old as she was, the more ancient she became, the more brilliant, bright, youthful ideas she had. She was ultimately creative all the time, and she had a brightness in her eyes. If she looked at you one time, you would just be filled with this light and warmth. And Weaver Woman, she lived in a big cave, and she spent most of her days weaving this tapestry. And they say that without Weaver Woman weaving the tapestry, there would be no weaving of the grasses and the plants and the corn and the trees. But Weaver Woman, she eventually had to put down her weaving and make her way across the cave. And it took a long time to walk from the chair all the way over to the big cauldron, where she was always stirring this cauldron, making this incredible stew. It was delicious. And they say without Weaver Woman making the stew, there would be no nourishment upon this earth for us. No nourishment for body, for soul, for heart, for mind, or imagination. But the problem was when Weaver Woman left her weaving and walked over to the cauldron, there was a big black dog just outside. You know that black dog, right? Yeah. And he just knew the exact moment when she was gone. And he would steal in, and he would tear up some of the weaving. And she'd walk back, and she'd go, "Oh, that black dog, he's been here again. Shoo, get out of here!" And the black dog would go away. And then Weaver Woman would do what Weaver Woman always did. She would sit and patiently reweave life back into life and reweave. And they say that her reweavings were even more beautiful than what she had woven before. And the White Mountain Apaches say, all praise to Weaver Woman, and some praise to the black dog, too. Right? Thank the White Mountain Apache for that story. Well, this is my yearly attempt to break the stranglehold of Cupidism on Valentine's Day, right? Because I love, as much as anybody, I love chocolate, flowers, getting a nice card from my sweetheart, and red wine and all that stuff. And I especially love going to Fred Meyer at 5 o'clock on Valentine's Day and trying to find those dozen red roses, you know. And there's a group of guys there. They're always there at that time. It's called the guys about to be in very deep trouble, right? And we all have this kind of hangdog sad expression mixed with terror, you know, because we know we've screwed it up completely. But anyway, I want to sort of expand the experience of Valentine's Day to include all the things that we love in the world exactly the way it is. in the tattered, grief-stricken, grief-filled, beautiful, and joyous world. And so what I'd like to do is have us raise a toast. And if you can think of anything that kind of reminds you of the rag and bone shop in your own heart or of your own memory, and this could be something maybe that's old and venerable or something that has served you well. It could be a person, it could be a place, it could be a memory, it could be an idea. And I'm going to start out with my 2001 Mazda pickup truck. Salud. I thought I'd set the bar really low, okay? So just shout out. We got a few things going here.
1999 hiking boots.
Whoa, yes. Right.
The Annapurnas in fact.
Wow. The ancestors. Good. Baseball. You know what they say? Baseball is not about life and death, but the Boston Red Sox are. Okay? That's it? Just
my mother's gnarled hands.
Oh, nice. Mother's gnarled hands. Drink to that. What's that? Our old love. Yeah, a lot of memories went back in the Rolodex on that. Oh, yeah, her. Remember that.
My pair of hummingbirds.
Oh, hummingbirds. Uh-huh. Good deal. Your memory. That's good. It reminds me of the Billy Collins poem. He said, even now, the names of American or South American capitals are disappearing from my mind. The name of the book, the author, the theme. Innocence.
My kid's childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Our little dog, Chica.
Chica the dog. The old artichoke, indeed, on Hawthorne. Yeah, this place has been around for a while.
Ailish Hines disco pants.
Ailish. Now that's good. Well, I wanted to. Anyone else? I don't want to. I wanted to make a little toast to a friend of mine who is definitely out of the rag and the bone shop of the heart kind of place. She was when I met her, she was probably in her 60s, and she was pretty weathered. She had lived a big life, and she was tough. And I didn't know a lot of tough women in my little suburban world at that time. Her name was Miriam Summel, and Miriam Summel was the editor of a newspaper where I interned at age 21. And I call her my literary godmother. And this is a little offering I wrote to her. Her name was Miriam Summel, of Russian Jewish descent, the editor of the Belmont Courier Bulletin, a small-town weekly where I worked, 1972, aged 21, as a reporter. She smoked Pall Malls, drank black coffee, devoured the San Francisco Chronicle daily. She loved politics, had opinions. She quoted the poet Keats, knew history, and adored anything well written. We shared an office together, pounded out news stories on industrial strength Underwood typewriters. We edited copy with thick pencils. We cut and pasted with scissors and glue pots, beat deadlines, logged late nights at the printers. She didn't so much teach me as infect me with ideas and language and the names of writers and poets and books and a care uncompromising for words. We became friends and remained so long after. I visited her often in the cabin she rented in a stand of oak trees behind Stanford University, a place erased decades ago by bulldozers. Her home had walls lined with books, Her house and yard was patrolled by an enormous Siamese cat. Her vegetable garden always thick with basil, rosemary, and tomatoes. When I became a working reporter, I sent her my clippings. Sometimes I sit and drink red jug wine like I used to do with Miriam. And I raise a toast to her, a mensch of this world, generous beyond measure, imprinted indelibly on my own soul's page. Wherever you are, dear friend, in whatever language you now speak, may you know the intelligence and the eloquence you bestowed upon us all. To my friend Miriam Summel. Well, sometimes, I don't know if this is your experience, but love can have a start and then a stop, and then it can have another start and another stop, and sometimes it gets messed up, and things have a way of working out somehow, And it's not something I know about personally, but people have told me these stories that they have, And there's actually an Irish song about this. And it's a story about a young woman who finds a mate, and she's so happy. She goes to tell her father the good news about her betrothed, but he has some rather disappointing news for her. And it's called Johnny Be Fine and Johnny Be Fair. And you'll have to imagine me as a fetching fair young lass, okay? I know. Good luck with that. Well, Johnny be fine and Johnny be fair, and he longed with me to wed. And oh, I would have married Johnny, had not my father said, daughter, let me tell you something that your mother never knew. Johnny is a son of mine, and therefore kin to you. Oh, but then I met Ian. Oh, and Ian was fine, and Ian was fair, and he longed with me to wed. And sure I'd have married Ian, had not my father said, daughter, there's another thing your mother never knew. Ian also is a son of mine, and therefore half-brother to you. Aye. Oh, but then I met Seamus. And Seamus was fine, and he was fair, and longed with me to wed. And we were busy making wedding plans until the day my father said, daughter, there's yet another thing your mother never knew. Seamus is a son of mine and not an appropriate husband for you. Well, you never did see a lass so sad and sorry as I was. All the boys in town were me brothers, and me father was the cause. If this should thus continue, I will die a single miss. I think I'll go to my mother and complain to her of this. Oh, but mother said, daughter, haven't I taught you to forgive and to forget? So your father sowed some wild oats. There's no need for you to fret. Your father may be father to the boys in town, but still, he's not the man who sired you. Lass, marry who you will. Aye. We toast to Women's Liberation Day with that song, that's right. Well, how about a story? You've been here long enough, right? You came here for a story. Would you like a story? All right, well, good. Well, I want to say that, one thing about the Valentine's Day is it's good to, to toast to our old trucks and our friends and this and that, but it's also good, it's important to love ourselves, don't you think? Just our complete, utter, total selves, right? And Oscar Wilde, a great Irish poet, once said, just be yourself. After all, everyone else is already taken, But if just being ourselves was easy, more of us would do it, But the fact of the matter is, as Oscar Wilde found out, there could be a rather high price to pay for being yourself in all of our godlike grandeur and also our rather shabby humanity. And the price to pay sometimes is exile, being an outcast, sometimes just outcast into the place of irrelevance, or sometimes exiled to another place. Because you see, the world isn't necessarily completely interested in what is utterly, totally unique. even if it's incredibly beautiful and mysterious, if it doesn't come along just perfectly packaged and colored and tailored just so. Because haven't all of us learned there are certain parts of ourselves we might want to trim back just a little bit, if not cut off completely, or just forget about. But then there's other parts of ourselves we're taught to improve upon, right? To improve so we might be worthy of the world's attention. But William Blake, the great poet, he said, improvement makes roads straight, but the crooked roads, those are roads of genius. And here's a tale of one whose whole life was a rather long and crooked road of genius. It happened in a place of such bucolic pastoral beauty it would break your heart just to see it. Rolling hills and farmlands and gently undulating streams, and you could see in the softest summer evenings the animals grazing in these fields thick with silken grasses. And there were woodlots and hillsides, and there was the song of the lark and the song of the wren, and of course the cawing of crows as well. It was a beautiful land, stitched together by small farms. And in the middle of that land there was a village, and in the village there was a pub. Imagine that, a pub. It was right across the street from the church, the two centers of worship in that village. And on this particular night, you could hear laughter coming from the pub, and if you went inside, you'd see a group of rather burly farmers all gathered around a table. All men there doing what men in pubs do. They were toasting, and they were boasting, and of course they were roasting one another, you know, in a good-hearted, friendly way. But they were deep into their cups now, you know. And the best parties, they always start out with laughter, and don't they end with weeping, the best parties? And they were all looking at this one farmer there. He wasn't old, he wasn't young, he was sort of in the middle, and they were saying, oh man, you're the best among us. Look at you, your farm, always the best grains. And your animals, they win all the ribbons at the fairs. But for all of that, man, where's the crop of children to help you and the missus with all the farm chores? You need that, man. Don't you need the children? Sure, it's a mouth to feed, but they have hands to help you work. Well, that farmer, he just kind of bowed his head. He knew that it was all said in love and kindness, but perhaps because he was deep in his cups, it went deep into his heart. And you could see him on the way home there, on the wagon there, just kind of mumbling to himself. He says, blast it. I can plant a seed in any furrow and it'll grow, but can I plant one seed in the womb of my wife to grow? No, I can't. What kind of a man is that? And he got home and he was sort of stamping around. And his wife came upon him and said, husband, what is it? She says, what troubles you? And he said, wife, you know, we have everything we need and a farm and it produces in great abundance, but try as I might, I can't make a child with you. And she says, husband, some things aren't meant to be. And he said, woman, you know, sometimes I wouldn't care what it was. I wouldn't care if we had a bloody hedgehog as long as it was our own, you know. Husband, be careful what you're asking for here. You know, words, they're like seeds. You just toss them out, they might grow into something. He says. He went to bed. He went to bed and he slept. And in the morning they were up. They were farmers. They were up before first light. And the whole thing was forgotten, because to be a farmer is to labor in the earth, to labor hard and long, not to belabor what could be or what would have been and any of that kind of thing. And you see, this place, it was known by spring plantings and the labor of summer tending and autumn harvest and winter mending and rest. It was a place of work. And that spring, of course, as it always was, the shoots of the grasses came through, and the summer came, and the fruit began to swell upon the trees. And pretty soon, the woman could feel something swelling in her own womb there. And she was so happy. And she said, husband, I am with child. I'm with child. And they looked at each other, and the bloom of youth was upon their faces, and they were so happy together. And weeks passed that way, and months passed that way, and they remained so happy until the day when that midwife delivered the child, and as she did, she gasped. And the wife said, "What is it?" And she said, "Well, I don't know exactly." She took it out of the womb, and, well, it was a man-child to be sure. But it had a pelt of quills that ran from its forehead all the way down its back. It had little quills upon the back of its arms, too. Now, it had arms like a boy and feet like a boy, hands like a boy, but beady little eyes that darted about, and a cute little nose. He was a hedgehog and a boy. And, of course, the husband said, "What thing is this that we've been cursed with?" And the woman said, "Husband, he's beautiful. Look at him. There's nothing else like him." She called him Hans my hedgehog. And she nursed him as you would any child, but it wasn't easy because sometimes the quills kind of poked her and pricked at her, you know. But she wore a shawl around her. And they found out soon that with the quills, it would sort of tear up the bedclothes in the bassinet there. So they just made him a nice cedar box and lined it with straw. And they put Hans my hedgehog in the box and by the stove, and he was fine there. And the father said, "He'll know no end of trouble in this world, and will know no end of trouble for having spawned him. I tell you, woman, it would be better for all and sundry if he died." She said, "No." Far from dying, Hans my hedgehog, he grew to be a strong infant. And, you know, hedgehogs are mysterious creatures. They're beautiful little creatures. They're like small bears. They hibernate. They dig deep, you know. People love them for pets. They have a soft underbelly, and they're very curious. And, of course, when they're threatened, they roll into a huge ball, and they make this impenetrable ball of sharp quills. You don't want to mess with a hedgehog. But one day they decided on market day they were going to take him to the fair, and they put him in the bassinet. They were strolling through the marketplace there. And most people, they smiled and they complimented the couple, and others, they couldn't help themselves to stifle a laugh. And, of course, the father noticed that. Because, after all, what is a son but some reflection of his father? And the father wanted to see nothing of himself in that thing. For he is neither a boy nor a hedgehog, neither a hedgehog nor a boy. He's a strange, odd thing. Well, he grew. And as he grew, he was the apple of his mother's eye and a stone in his father's heart. And he was an object of derision for all and sundry and all his peers, who would cry out, "Oh, hedgehog boy, have you eaten your grubs today? Oh, hedgehog boy, have you combed your quills? Get out of here, you runt." He grew up, and he was at table one day, slurping out of the bowl, which he often did. And finally his father said, "Blast it. If you can't eat like a boy, then just get away." Well, Hans my hedgehog, he did what many people do when they can't find anyone there to give them any affection or attention. He went off to find it where he could, you see. And he did find it. He found those who didn't think he was strange or odd or mysterious. They found that he was rather wonderful. They found he was incredible. The very thing his father disdained him for, they loved him because they thought, well, look at him. He's got a foot in two worlds. He's an animal and a human being. He speaks the language of the human beings, but he seems to understand the language of the animals as well. Well, they thought he was wonderful. They applauded him. They brought him in. And you might be wondering who these folks are and where could we find them? Was it the Christians? Well, it wasn't. You see, they wouldn't baptize him because they didn't know if he had a soul or not, you know. You might think it might be the all-encompassing, all-inclusive Unitarians. But it wasn't. Because Hans, being a hedgehog, had a rather strong, musky odor, you see. And they prefer an odorless worship environment. The ones who truly, truly loved and appreciated Hans were the animals. It was the animals of the fields. It was the hares and the deer, the squirrels, and around the farm and the barnyard. It was the horses and the donkeys, the geese, the hogs, because what better judge of character is there than an animal? A pig, a horse, a goat even. For they don't care a fig for outer appearance. All they care about is a kind and patient and all-consuming presence and stillness. And Hans had that in spades. And so didn't he go out now and tend to the animals? And he was given that responsibility. And as he did, they would come around him. And you never saw animals happier. They would bleat and they would bray and they would honk and they would neigh. And pretty soon Hans, he learned their language. Indeed. And he could grunt as well as any hog, squeal like any pig. He'd come out to the barnyard and they would all come out to greet him. And not only that, but his own father noticed that under his care, the flocks and the herds, they flourished. The hides of the cows and the horses gleamed, and the feathers of all the fowl, they were bright with plumage. And so it was. But of course, Hans's father never recognized that with an approving glance, only a look of contempt all the time. But Hans was a husbandman born and bred. And one day he went out and he was counting the chicks, which he always did, counting the chicks, 19 and 20. One's missing. He cast about, he looked for it everywhere, he couldn't find it. He looked the next day, he couldn't find it. A week passed by, and one day that chicken came right back towards the coop. And Hans, he picked it up, he put it into the coop, and he noticed all the other chicks now, they pecked at it mercilessly. For after all, hadn't he been somewhere else? And they didn't welcome him home. And fortunately, Hans, he pulled him out of that pen and gave him a little pen all to himself and raised him as his own. And that chick became a rooster and followed him everywhere. And he cared for it so well, the rooster grew into the size of a goose. And it kept growing into the size of a goat. And after a while, it was the size of a small horse. And then a not-so-small horse. It was big enough where Hans could leap upon it. And the hedgehog boy would go riding about the countryside and through the barnyards. And when he did, you'd never see animals as happy as they were. Well, time passed. One day, Hans, he saw his father packing the wagon, getting ready to go into town to pick up supplies. And he said, "Father, I ask of you 3 boons to give me. And if you give me those 3 boons, I promise you, I'll leave this place and you'll never have to look upon me again." And what would those 3 boons be? They are these, Father. I want my rooster shod with iron shoes so he can traipse easily far and wide. I want a saddle made specially for him so he's easier to ride. And Father, I've always fancied myself a bit of a musician, but I've lacked a musical instrument. What did you have in mind, Hans? Bagpipes. I should have known. But the father, he went to town, and sure enough, he did return. And in time, the rooster was shod, and it was saddled, and he had the set of bagpipes, and the day came for leaving home. And we all leave home. And some leave home reluctantly because home has been a place of love and affection and care and kith and kin. And some leave home because home never really was a home. And they go off seeking some kind of place to call home. Well, you could see Hans there outside, and his mother there weeping, and his father there stern, arms crossed. And Hans, he embraced his mother and thanked her for all the love that she'd shown him. Oh, I forgot to tell you, if you want to use the restroom, because I could see this conversation happening here. What you want to do, girls, is go straight back and to your left in a round, and there's a bathroom back there. Otherwise, if you go in there, we're all going to be wondering, are they coming out again? Can you do that? Yeah, sure. By the way, if any of you need to get up and do anything or get another drink at the bar, feel free to do that. We are in a cafe. So Hans my hedgehog there, he was about to leave home, and he embraced his mother who'd given him everything. Whatever love he knew, it came from her. And then he couldn't help himself. He just threw his arms around his father and drew him to him. And his father couldn't help himself. He sort of tentatively embraced his son. he found out that his son's quills, they were rather soft, And his son, he was strong as well as gentle. And for the first time in his life, that father felt a pang of grief and sadness. But just like that, he watched as his son leapt upon this rooster and picked up his bagpipes. And he watched him ride off. A hedgehog boy on a rooster playing the bagpipes, being followed by a few hogs and some goats and a couple of geese. And if that isn't a perfect picture of adolescence, I don't know what is. So here's a toast to all the times, and there are probably many that we have had to leave home in one way or another, to all those leavings that we have to take, the people we've said farewell to, and the people that have made home for us. Sláinte. Well, afoot and light-hearted, healthy and free, I take to the open road, the world before me, the long brown road leading wherever I choose. Henceforth, I ask not good fortune. Henceforth, I myself am good fortune. Henceforth, I whimper no more, postpone no more, need nothing. Loosed of limits and imaginary lines, done with indoor complaints and criticisms, divesting myself now of all the holds that would hold me. I inhale great draughts of space. The east and west are mine. The north and south are mine. Strong and content, I travel the open road. Walt Whitman, Song of Myself. Hans traveled the open road. He was strong, he was content, he was happy. He was happy beneath the stars, sleeping in the open air, happy listening to the singing of the streams and the creeks. He was happy as he wandered through deep woods, far and wide and far he did wander. He was happy everywhere he went, save for those places, towns and villages and marketplaces and fairs where people gathered. Because you can probably imagine people way back then and there, they were a lot like people right here and now, upon seeing a hedgehog boy upon a big rooster playing the bagpipes, being followed by swine. They chided him, they derided him. Sometimes they would just say, "Away with you, you runt, get out of here." Children threw rocks and sticks. And soon Hans did what many people have done, unable to find a place in the community of people just because they're themselves. He went away into the deepest part of the woods, into the wildest part of the wilderness. Because as people will disappoint and disappear, the earth will meet your every footfall. It will hold you. It will heal you as well. And Hans, he came to a huge clearing in this forest with great spires of trees. He could climb trees like a squirrel, you know. And he took branches and small logs, and he would weave things together until he had made this beautiful little tree house up there in the trees. A little gabled roof, you know. And of course, the rooster would perch up there, and he would sit on the branches and lean against the trunk. The hogs, they rooted happily in the forest there. And the goats and the geese, they grazed as well. And in time, Hans the Hedgehog, he traveled far and wide through those woods, and he found beautiful streams, and he swam in deep pools, and he knew every flying and slithering and crawling and running creature that lived there. And they were like kith and kin to him, and he was not alone any longer. And all of those things fed him, and they came into him, and they helped to heal his heart. And then Hans would sit up in the trees, and he would take his pipes, and he would play everything out of him as well. He played out all his grief and all his longing, and even from a great distance, you could hear these lamenting tunes on the pipes, the sound of melancholy and sadness. But then there was the sound of, well, as strength and exuberance. For hours every day, he would play everything that was in him, every feeling, he would play it out of himself. And finally, Hans the Hedgehog was at peace. And if it was up to me, ladies and gentlemen, I would just leave him there right now. Just end the whole bloody night, you know. But unfortunately, I'm a mere teller of tales, not the author of them. And I'm beneath the authority of the tale and must continue even though it does mean trouble. Because life often means trouble. Have any of you been able to avoid trouble? Don't raise your hand, okay? It'll find you if you do, you know. Trouble came for Hans the Hedgehog in the form of a thick fog. And this thick fog, it moved into the woods, and it was so thick you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. And it remained for days and days and days. And it so happened that in that fog, there was a king. And the king was with his retinue of hunters. And they became hopelessly lost in the fog, and they were confused and they were confounded, going around in circles. And one day the king says, what's that sound? What's that? Is that the sound of bagpipes? And they listened, and away in the distance they could hear these pipes being played beautifully. And the king said, make our way toward those pipes. We might find a person, be able to get us out of this place. And they made their way through briar and bramble and across creeks and up and over hills, you know. And finally they came to this clearing, and the king looked up and he said, well, look at you, hedgehog boy. What a fine piper you are. Can you help us? Can you help us, son? Can you get us out of these woods? And Hans the Hedgehog said, I'd be happy to do that. But it's getting late. The dark will soon be falling upon us. Why not bide this night with me? I'll make you fresh meat upon the fire, and we can pass the night with a tune against the gloom of the fog. Ah, the king said, thank you. And Hans the Hedgehog did just that. He roasted fine meat, and the king had libations, and they stayed up late, and they sang, and he played the pipes. And the next day, at dawn, at first light, sure enough, even in the thick fog, Hans was able to help them find a way out. They came to the edge of the woods, and finally the king looked down and said, there it is. There's my castle. There's my realm, and I want to give you something, Hans. And Hans says, you needn't do that. And he says, oh, no, I insist. What would you like? And Hans says, I don't care. Give me the first thing that crosses your path. And he laughed. And the king laughed because they knew it would be a dog. That was always the first thing out of the gate to meet the king. But it wasn't. Well, it was. It was a dog that came flying out of the gates, bounding there to meet the king, for it was loyal to the king. But it just so happened a rabbit crossed its path, and it was even more loyal to its instincts as a dog, and away it went. And behind the dog, there was a horse, and upon the horse there was a woman. Who do you think she was? The princess. I know, it's so easy to figure this stuff out. It was this princess. And of course, she was this raven-haired, green-eyed beauty, and she come thundering along. Oh, father, so good to see you. And he thought, oh, what have I done? And the next day he said, darling, come here now. I want to tell you a little bit about a possible potential suitor I've found for you. Interesting man, musician, excellent musician. Lives well. He has a view, home with a view, incredible view up there. And he rides, like yourself, he rides foul and in fair weather too, I would imagine. He's a bit of a hedge hog, maybe hog fund manager, say, I don't know. Deeply invested in commodities, you know, quite successful. And she kept asking him questions, you know, and after a while she figured it out. She said, Father, really? A hedgehog boy riding a rooster, playing the bagpipes, living in a treehouse, herding swine as my husband? She said, what do you think, I'm from Oregon or something? She says, I'm not impressed. I don't care if it's organic pork. I don't care. Oh. And he went to the guards. He went to all the men. He says, now listen to me. He says, if ever you see a hedgehog boy riding a rooster, playing the bagpipes, and approaching the castle, you make certain that he's known he is quite unwelcome. And if you need arrows and stones and spears to do it, you do that. You understand? Oh, they did. But Hans, for his part, he was back in the woods wondering now what he should do. And he just wondered. And he bathed himself in 3 different springs. And he put fresh pine sap upon himself. And he sort of polished up his quills, you know. He leapt upon the rooster. And he played this loveliest of tune coming down out of the hills toward the castle. And he was hopeful, because he could see there were people scurrying up upon the parapets, men scurrying up upon the parapets, and he wondered maybe they were going to unfurl banners and welcome him. But they weren't unfurling banners, they were knocking arrows to bows. And just like that, there was a hail of arrows and spears and stones slung from slings. And without that rooster and his quick ability to move this way and that, well, it would have been the end. And they retreated up the hill, and they turned back, and they looked down, and their ire had been greatly aroused. And among the things you don't want to do in this world is piss off a rooster the size of a horse and a hedgehog boy, steeled and strengthened by a life of living in the wilds and the woods. And the guards, they soon found that out, because what they saw, it struck fear into their hearts. But it wasn't what they saw first, it was what they heard. Because, a bagpipe can put a lovely, mournful melody, but it's a martial instrument as well. And Hans blew such a blast, and the guards looked up to see this enormous rooster just thundering down this hill, with this hedgehog boy with his quills just straight up like that now. And down and down and down he came. And he leapt up into the parapets. He knocked the guards right off of their stations. And with Hans upon his back, the rooster, he flew down, down, down into the courtyard and scattered the other guards like so many what? Chickens. And then he pecked and he clawed at the door and he pushed it open and he bounded up the stairs. With Hans upon his back, they came right in to the king's chamber where he sat at tea with his daughter. And the king said, "Well, a warm welcome to you, Hans, my hedgehog." And Hans said, "I'd hate to see what a cold shoulder looks like." And he said, "Princess, I saw that you were the first thing to greet your father, and your father promised that first thing to me, but I don't believe that any person can give some person to some other person. Only one person can give their heart to another. But I did just dodge every sling and stone and spear known to man. I did feast your father well and return him to his own castle. So I'm thinking tomorrow maybe we could just do lunch or something." And she said, "Well, all right." He was the soul of politeness. And she listened as well as she could. And finally she said, "Now look, this isn't going to work. I'm a princess. You're a hedgehog boy living in a treehouse, riding a rooster, playing the bagpipes. And the bagpipes, really, they're so loud. Most of the men have switched to oboes and French horns. And look at you with those quills. I mean, you really should get some work done. It's just scary." "Ah," he said. He took a quill from him, and he put it towards her, and he said, "I just want to show you how those words feel to me." And ever so gently, he just pricked her with it. And it was the first time that her little world had been punctured, had been pricked, and the needle, it went in just a little bit, but just caused a little drop of blood to stain that beautiful gown that she had. And it was like that little quill, it broke this little bubble, this balloon she'd been living in, and all of a sudden she looked at this boy, and she could see right through his eyes, right to his soul. And he could see right towards her soul as well. And if you've ever done that, it's amazing, it's mysterious, it's absolutely beautiful, and it's terrifying. And she was terrified. And she got up and she went on her way. And Hans my hedgehog, he did the same. And he played a mournful tune as he left that castle back up into the hills and the woods, and he remained there. But you know how it is. Sometimes trouble comes in twos, and threes, and fours, and fives. It came again with a thick fog that came into the woods. And strange as it may seem, it was another king that got lost in the woods with his men. And didn't they come to a clearing because of the pipes and see a hedgehog boy and ask if he might lead him out? And he said he would. And didn't he feast him? And didn't they drink libations? And didn't he bring him to the edge? Are you noticing the coincidences here? It's the stuff of a fairy tale, He came to the edge of the woods. And once again, the king, he said, "I'll give you anything I can." And Hans says, "You needn't give me anything." And "Oh, no, I insist." And Hans says, "Well, just give me whatever it is that first crosses your path, because this time certainly it's going to be a dog." And once again, the gates opened. And sure enough, a dog came by. And of course, what crossed its path but It was a squirrel this time. It's a little bit of variation. The dog ran off, and of course, right behind was the princess, embraced her father. And Hans just turned back into the woods. For he had had enough with kings and promises and princesses and all that stuff. And he just remained in the woods for a time, and maybe it was a short time or a long time. I have no idea how long it was, but after a while he realized, I'm not at home here any longer. It just doesn't feel right to stay. And so away he went. He went out of the woods, and now he was followed by an enormous herd of hogs behind him. For he was a husbandman born and bred, and they had done well. And there were goats bleating, and there were geese honking, and he made his way down the road. He came all the way back to the town that he was from. And the people, they lined the streets, and they looked at this hedgehog boy, a man now, and all the abundance he was bringing with him. And didn't he fill every stall and sty and barnyard and corral with all those livestock? And the people, they thanked Hans the hedgehog, and then he made his way off. And this time he said, I will not live by myself in exile any longer. I'll find a way to live among people. To find a way to live among men and women like myself, I will do that. And away he went. It's like the great poet from Zaire, Kuba, said, before I die, I want to be hoisted upon the shoulders of my people. Before I die, and when I die, don't bury me alone in the woods beneath the trees there. Bury me in the marketplace, beneath the spreading tree. I want to feel the drumming above my grave. I want to feel the thrumming of the dancers' feet above my grave. When I die, don't bury me alone in the woods beneath the trees there. Bury me beneath the spreading tree in the marketplace. And so Hans my hedgehog, away he went. And now he was determined to find his way among people, and it wasn't an easy way. But the fact is, for one, even though people thought he looked strange, and he did, they could not deny the beauty of the music that he played. And he would find places in the marketplace, at the crossroads, at the festivals playing. And he was hired here and there and traipsed through the countryside in that way. And then at any farm he went to, in no time the farmers could tell, here was a husbandman born and bred. Not only that, he could help. He could help the ewes to lamb and the cows to calve and the mares to foal. In every animal, well, they grew and did well in his presence. And Hans found work here and there. And of course, there were fights and there were insults and there were difficulties, but that pelt that he wore seemed to protect him. And he was able to make his way through. And finally, he wandered far and wide. Seasons passed, snows fell and melted. And of course, the shoots grew and the trees fruited and the harvests came. And one day, he noticed he wasn't far from that castle, remember the second castle? And he just wondered, it had been a while, you know. Maybe his reception would be different. And he made his way towards that castle, on the rooster and playing the pipes, a beautiful tune. But once again, he noticed the men leaping up upon the parapets. And just as he was about to turn around, he noticed that they weren't knocking arrows to bows. They weren't putting stones in slings. They were unfurling banners. And he watched as the gates opened. And people, they filed out, and they formed like two columns, and they were hailing him, come now, come. Hans, hedgehog, come here, come this way. For you see, those guards and those people had been told by that king, if ever you see a hedgehog boy riding a rooster, playing the pipes, you give him all manner of welcome. For he saved the life of myself and my men, and he is always welcomed here. Hans the hedgehog, he didn't know what to think. But as he rode closer and closer, he could see they were beckoning him to come. And as he came close, he could see these people, these folk. There were no hedgehog boys among them, but this was a strange crowd of characters. And they all waved to him and hailed him. He'd come expecting a battle. But he was given a strange sort of blessing instead. And he passed under the archway. In the archway it said, outcast, exile, wanderer, wayfarer, welcome. And he came into the courtyard, and there was the king himself. He says, Hans, my hedgehog, where have you been? We've been waiting for you. Come here, boy. Come here, son. And he embraced him. And then he called out, he says, daughter, come here. He's here. And out came this woman. She had this red hair. It looked like it had been through a windstorm about 10 different times, you know. She had dirt under her fingernails. And she come running out, and her eyes were all curiosity and brightness, you know. And she said, Hans, my hedgehog. She said, we've been waiting for you. Thank you for saving my father. You know, he's a great man, but he couldn't navigate his way out of a potato sack. We're going to have a feast in your honor, Hans, my hedgehog. He said, really? Yes. And we want you to play the pipes at the feast. He said, really? You want me to play the bagpipes at the feast? Oh, she said, of course. There's nothing greater than a good piper. And so many men have switched to those wimpy oboes and French horns, you know. But what's better than fine pipes, you know? Well, there was a feast the next evening. It was amazing. In the big feasting hall, there was a table, there was the king, and there was the princess, and there was Hans, and Hans spoke to people, they spoke to him. But the princess, she just peppered him with questions. She wanted to know, how did the hogs root in the forest? How did they manage to survive? And when you made the treehouse there, did you notch the logs, or did you lash them together? How did you make those things, you know? And he noticed that she liked her food. She loved to eat. She loved to drink. And she wasn't beautiful in that sense of Princess Beautiful, but there was something about her. It was the fact that she was utterly, completely, totally, and unapologetically herself. And as the feasting wound down, she asked Hans, would you strike up a tune for us, Hans? And he said, I would. And he picked up the pipes and all turned to him, and he played, and soon he filled the whole feasting hall with this beautiful, beautiful sound. It was like he took them on a journey, right? There was sadness and lament and melancholy in it. There was the sound as powerful as the belling of the stags that he knew in the woods. There was the sound of the power of approaching storms. There was sweetness. There was beauty in it, and it went on and on and on. And people couldn't find words to describe it, but they could feel it. And finally, when he finished, there was a long, deep, rich silence. Until someone clapped, and then someone else, and pretty soon the whole room cheered, and they stood up. And they looked at Hans, and he had never known that kind of adulation before. And he was so happy. And the next day, the king, he summoned Hans to him. And he said, Hans, my hedgehog, I have to go back on my word, you know, because I think I promised you the first thing that crossed my path. And the first thing that crossed my path, you might have seen, was my daughter. And I'm sorry, but I can't be giving her away. Only she could give herself away. And Hans says, I know that. I know that. And there's no need to give me anything. Look what you've already given me. You've given me the warmest welcome I've ever known. You've feasted me. You give me a place to play the pipes. And I'll remember this day on my travels from here on and forever. Well, Hans, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I want to give you something. Now, I don't know if you want it or not, but if you do want it, Hans, my hedgehog, I'd like to give you a place to bide. I'd like to give you a place to stay for a day, a week, a month, as long as you'd like to be here. Because I think you might find there are those here that you'd find kinship with, friendship with. You see, this realm is made up of cast-offs and exiles from all kinds of other realms. We've all come together to make this. And I know you're a man of countless competencies and skills, and you can ply whatever trade you want, wherever you want to do that. But Hans, come and just bide with us for a time and see how it is. And Hans didn't know what to say. He didn't know whether to trust it, and he feared a bit, but he stayed. Didn't he stay for a while? He stayed for a while longer, and sure enough, there were people that would invite him into hearth and home and at supper table, and they would talk to him. And of course, he was a man who was utterly, completely dependable, and after a while, they depended a great deal upon him. He loved to labor, and he found much work to do, and pretty soon he was indispensable and woven into that very community. And he found that his path often crossed the path of this princess, because she wasn't really an ordinary kind of princess. She was much more at home shoeing a horse than she was embroidering a doily, you see. She much preferred the company of peasants and plowmen to princes and noblemen, you see. And one time she asked what it was like to ride a rooster instead of a horse. And he said, well, there's only one way to find out. And he put her on it, and she fell off. But she got on it again, and that was good. She would watch him when he wasn't looking. She would watch him working with the animals, because there's a lot you can tell about a man by watching him when he works, especially if he doesn't think he's been watched. And what she noticed about Hans the Hedgehog was that with the animals, he moved with this incredible slowness and stillness, and he had this patience even with the most stubborn of creatures. And he found that they would draw near to him. It wasn't something you could see, but it was an atmosphere you could feel just by walking into it. And she loved that. She asked him about it, and she would learn from him. And he taught her many things about what he knew. And in turn, she took him places he never would have known. Beautiful hidden springs and meadows that were rich with wildflowers of every kind and every color. Here and there they went, and they were often together, usually working or talking about something, you know. But one day they were mucking out some stall or some sty and mud all over themselves, you know. And he looked at her and he said, he says, you're my friend, aren't you? And she said, I am your friend, Hans. You're mine. And he said, I am. Then I want you to answer a question for me as a friend. Just tell me the truth. Do you think somewhere in this realm or this world there is a woman who could love a man in spite of him being a hedgehog and a man, riding a rooster, playing the bagpipes, and herding swine? And she says, well, I don't know. I imagine somewhere there's a woman who could love a man in spite of all of that. She says, I couldn't. And he says, oh. She says, no. The man I love because of all of that. You see, the man I love because he's a hedgehog and a man and rides a rooster and plays the bagpipes and herds swine. And Hans said, excuse me, I'm not much studied in matters of romance here, but isn't it a bit unconventional for a woman to tell a man that she loves him first? And she said, oh, right. And I can tell that you, hedgehog boy riding a rooster, playing the pipes, are all about convention, aren't you? And she says, so Hans, my hedgehog, I feel like my backside's kind of hanging out in the breeze here a little bit. How do you feel about me? Oh, he says, well, I loved you the moment I first laid eyes on you. She says, that's good. It was good. It was good then. It remained good. It remained so good that they decided to share that goodness and that love with other people, and they had this gathering, you know. It was a small gathering. It was just right, and they were betrothed at that gathering, and then the time came after the gathering there to go to the wedding chamber, this beautiful room up in this little tower, and had a nice fire burning and a comfortable bed. And they opened the door and came inside, and Hansi kindled the fire back to life, and she pulled down the bedclothes there, and she had just a little trepidation, you see. And he said, I want you to help me with something. And she said, I will. And he said, you know, I've noticed over the months and such, this pelt, well, quills have been falling out, and it's been kind of loosening, and I think it might be time to see if I could take it off. And she said, truly? He said, yes. Help me now. And she put her hands on it, and she began to pull, and it did come a little bit, and she pulled a little more. But it was like some old bandage that's been on there for months, you know. Years, you know, and she pulled, and he did strain, and at times he cried out a little bit, but eventually they pulled that pelt off of him. And the skin was all raw and red and bleeding in places there, but she found ointments and oils, and she soothed him with that. And then he looked down at that pelt, and all those quills, and he picked them up. Well, you see, that pelt had protected him for all those years. It was like an old pair of grave clothes, though, but it had kept him strong and safe. Like grave clothes, he gently folded them over. And one last time, he smelled that musky odor. Then he bent down, almost in prayer, and he cast the pelt into the fire there. But what happened then is that every slight and every injury, every pain, every wound that he'd known all those years came right back through him now. And as that pelt burned, all that pain in him burned one last time as it made its way through. And he screamed, and he writhed, and he did grieve, and he wailed, and she held him through all of that. All that night, the fire was in there, but it was inside him, working its way out, and he screamed all that next day, and writhed, and he pounded. Every slight and every insult he'd taken at last was gone. And she held him. Until finally that great writhing in pain, it came to an end. And in its place, he began to know a writhing in pleasure with that one who he had wed. And one morning in that bed, they woke up not long after that, and she was asleep on the pillow. And not to disturb her, Hans my hedgehog, he got out of the bed at first light. And he came to the great window there. And he loved that time of day. The first light was coming across the fields. And couldn't you hear the early bird song? And couldn't you hear the roosters there? And the light came into the window. And he saw out to a whole new world with these new eyes. And later that morning, he and his bride, they walked out of that door into the rest of their lives. And they were so happy. They were so happy in time they decided to share that happiness with everybody. Because anything worth doing once is worth doing at least twice. And they decided to have a wedding all over again. And this time, people came from near and far. Pipers and wild dancers, and the tables were laden with the finest of fare. And there were great wines and libations of every kind. And the joy in that wedding, it was so great, the castle couldn't contain it. And it filled up the courtyard, it filled every room, and it went up and up and up and spilled out over into the courtyards and into the fields, and it was like a balm to the earth. And now, all of that happiness and joy, it crept into the stalls and the pens and the sties, and pretty soon the chickens were clucking, and the geese, they were honking, and the donkeys were braying, and horses were neighing, and they were so happy. And some of the winds carried that joy across to the four corners of the earth, and some of it even came to Portland, Oregon. And you can feel a little bit of it right now. Well, in time, Hans my hedgehog, he became the king of that realm. And didn't he swing the door even wider open to outcast and exile and wanderer and vagabond? All were welcome there. And the nice thing about that place is that it exists in once upon a time. And so it's still there. And you can go to visit it anytime you want. I was there a couple of weeks ago. And I talked with Hans and his beautiful red-haired bride. And I rode the rooster. And the people asked me if I might bide with them a while. And I said, I'd love to, but I have to get to artichoke music to tell the story to all these people. You see, and they said, we've heard of that place. And I said, yeah, there's a lot of outcasts and exiles, ne'er-do-wells, and rapscallions right there, too. And so I came and I told the story, and so ends the tale of Hans, my hedgehog, who, despite the world's disdain for him and many attempts to improve him, he somehow remained himself. And wasn't he able to make of his life a long, winding, crooked road of genius And what is a story after all, if not a long and winding road? And what is a storyteller, if not someone completely beyond any hope of improvement? And that's the story. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And that's a story from the Grimm's collection, known as Hans My Hedgehog. And the Grimms were interesting characters. Most of the stories that they found by listening. Many of them were told to them by women, cooks, maids, women servants that worked in houses. Some were educated women, literary women. Some of those stories were actually written down before. Some had been oral traditions that were passed along. But the Grimm's brothers got interested in storytelling in this way. They were law students, and they had a professor that made a profound impact on him. They told him, if you really want to know the law by which the people rule themselves by, if you really want to know common law, find the stories, the tales, the fables, and the folk tales that they already live by, because within that is the moral code of the people. And that's why they started to collect all these stories. They became fascinated with that. And they turned their avocation, of course, into a great vocation. Right? So as many of you know, I like to finish with a song. And it's a great song for a place like this because it's called The Parting Glass, you know. And please, if you know it, sing it with me. And if you don't, sing anyway, right? And it goes like so. Of all the money that e'er I had, I spent it in good company, and all the harm that e'er I done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Of all the comrades that e'er I had, they're sorry for my going away. And all the sweethearts that e'er I had, with a couple notable exceptions, they'd wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and softly call. Good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy be with you all. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you. And I want to thank again Artichoke for hosting us all here. You're sitting there. Did you want to hear like a short story or something? Or, oh, geez. All right. Well. I like that. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Something short and well, you know, this is one I like to rely upon. It's one of my favorite ones. Story about a couple of farmers. You might have heard of them. Sad story too. Pat Flaherty, Mike McCarthy. They were neighbors, you see, and they always helped each other out. You know, they always looked after each other's farms. You know, if one was sick and the other one had to be somewhere, whatever it was. Anyway, they knew each other for years, but one day it was Pat. He had to go off to Dublin, quite a ways away, to take care of his uncle, his ailing uncle. He was gone for 4 months. But of course, Mike watched after his farm all that time, you know. And finally, though, it was Pat. He made his way home by rail, you know, and you could see Mike now at the railway station with the buggy, you know, just the horse and the trap there. And And it was he and Mike making their way, the long ride by buggy, from the railway station all the way back to Pat's farm. And of course, on the way, Pat, he turned to Mike. He was curious. He just said, Mike, these months that I've been gone now, what's the news? And Mike said, there hasn't been any news. He says, well, I've been gone 4 months. Certainly something must have happened. No, nothing. Well, not since your dog died anyway. He says, the dog died? Well, that's a shame. Well, how did the dog die? Well, I'm not certain. I imagined it was all the burned horse flesh he ate when the barn burned down. It probably poisoned him. He says, the barn burned? My barn burned down? Well, clean to the stones. You could see it for miles. Says, Jesus, Mike, the barn burned down. Well, how did that happen? Well, now that I'm not certain of either, but I'm just assuming that it was a windy night that night, so quite possibly sparks from the house blew over and caught the barn on fire. Says, bloody hell, the house was on fire? Oh, it was. It's not any longer. It burned to the ground along with your barn. Says, Jesus, the house burned down. Well, how did that happen? Well, now that I can tell you. And wasn't I warning them all that night? Oh, I was. I was saying, you can't be lighting all these candles in a wood-framed house. It's dangerous, you know. Oh, didn't they say to me, Mike, you have to have the candles at a wake. They're customary. You always put them around the coffin, you know. Well, they caught the drapes on fire. I said, wait, a coffin? Someone died? Oh, I'm afraid it was your poor mother-in-law that took sick and died. Says, nothing could have killed her. How did she die? Well, I'm not certain, but I'm assuming heart attack, I think. Just the shock of seeing your wife run off with that young priest, that Father Kelly, you know. I never trusted him, Pat. My wife run off with a priest. My mother-in-law's dead. My house is burned to the ground. Horses have been killed, the barn, and you say there hasn't been any news. Well, no, like I said, not since the dog died. Sorry about that. Thanks, everybody. Stick around. No need to go early. We'll be around. Have another drink. Contribute generously to the fund up there. And definitely. Sounds good. All right. Yeah.